click on our team menu icon, and select Assessments, which are the stopwatch icon. Here we go. This is the screen where we select our battery and our assessment, as well as the athletes for which we want to enter a score. In this case, there's no option to select the battery. That's simply because we only defined one battery and the app knows that there's only one option, so it's automatically being selected. We just select the assessment as well, and whichever teams and athletes we want to add data for. In this case, I just want to add data for this team, First Tigers, so I'm going to select it, and now we've just got the athletes for it selected. If we had more than one battery defined, there would be a second option here to select the battery and then select the assessment, but in this case, just the assessment option because we've only got the one battery. Now we're just going to click Enter Data, and this is the data entry screen. You'll see we just go through, and for each athlete we enter their score for each test: height, weight, and then BMI is actually grayed out. The reason it's grayed out is because we defined a formula for it, and the app knows that it's going to be calculating the result rather than us entering it, so it doesn't even let you enter it. It's going to handle all of that automatically. Another note, if you've opted to use real dates instead of the calendar, instead of this drop-down, you would just have a date picker where you select the date for which you want to enter data and then enter the data. We did use the calendar, however, so we've got to select our assessment. Now before I enter the data, I do want to show you it looks slightly different if you're entering data for only one athlete, but the principle is the same. You just type in the data for each result and a comment or a file attachment if you'd like, and hit save. Back to the data entry screen for multiple athletes. You can still attach a comment or a file. You just click on the edit button next to the athlete's name, and you can set a comment and an attachment for that athlete only. Now we're going to enter our scores. Again, you can navigate using the arrow keys or the tab button. Now that we've entered our data, we just click Save. Now we can see only the athletes for which we just entered data are selected here, so if you want you can move on to the next assessment and enter it for those athletes as well. Instead, I'm actually going to go back in so we can see our BMI was calculated here by the system. That was done for us automatically. Now I'm just going to close out, and we actually only defined one assessment earlier, so I'm going to create one more. We just go back into our global settings and into our assessments calendar, add another one, and I'm going to call this one September assessment. And set it to be done September 15th. Submit. And now if we go back to our Teams page and back to the assessment data entry screen, we can select our new assessment, enter the data for the same team as before. And now that I've entered all my new data for the new assessment, we can just hit save. And again, we'll see if we go back in that the BMIs were all calculated. Now that we've seen how to enter data for both of our assessments, there's one more thing I want to show you before we move on to the reports. If we hit close here, you see these two icons. These are the export and import buttons. So if I select my First Tigers team here, for which I was entering data before, and select the export button, this gives me an Excel spreadsheet with all of the raw results I entered for the assessment. And you can see them here, sorted by test and by athlete, and including any comments you've added to each athlete's results. As far as the import goes, we simply select an Excel spreadsheet, and it has to be formatted the same way as the exported results were. So for example, what you can actually do is, here I've created a new assessment, and if we go in here, we'll see I haven't entered any data for this. So with this new assessment selected, I'm going to hit export. And when I open up this Excel file, it's going to be empty. All we've got are the names of our athletes and the test names. So here I'm going to enable editing and enter some data. And this is just dummy data for the sake of examples. Now if I save this Excel file, I can then upload this very same file And now we can import those very same results just by clicking the import button and selecting that very same spreadsheet. Make sure you know where it's saved in your computer. If we click import, it should come up that we've imported data for 3 athletes because that's the number of athletes I actually entered data for. Yes, we want to continue. And there we go, recorded for 3 athletes. And if we enter in this in the app, we'll see that data is present and the BMI has been calculated. And now if we go to export for that assessment, it's going to have the real data again. So as you can see, export is really useful if you like to still keep Excel spreadsheets for printing off or storing in an alternative way your results. And it's also an easy way to get a template for importing results from a spreadsheet. You just export before entering any data, or even after, fill in the data and then import again. Now that we've covered importing and exporting, we're ready to get into reports. To view the results, click on the Reports button up at the top right. Now select the 2 assessments you'd like to view. I'm going to select our September assessment and our summer assessment. Keep in mind, the system grabs not only the 2 assessments you select, but any which occur in between those 2, so you can compare many assessments all at once. Now let's take a look at the different types of reports which you select in this drop-down right here. First up is the Progress Report. The Progress Report shows you each athlete's score in each test. And you can see here whether or not an athlete's score has improved or slipped. Of course, this doesn't make a lot of sense for metrics like height or BMI necessarily because it depends on the athlete, but it can be very useful for different types of tests. You can also export this report as an Excel file, which comes up pretty much just like it does on the actual web page, as seen here. Or you can export it as a PDF using this button. It will take a moment to load, and if we open up the PDF that we get when we export it, it's very similar to the web page itself. The main difference is that each test has its own page. This is to avoid issues with width. A PDF isn't as wide as a widescreen computer monitor, which you would view a website on. So this makes it essentially print friendly. If we back out of this, the next report type is Team Profile. Right now, if we click View Report, we get this message that there's no standards. This is because we didn't set the battery to use standards, and this report is only for standards. If we had set the report to use standards, we'd get a few graphs, which I'll show you in a moment, but this comes up if you've selected improvement rates or if you've selected standards but haven't actually defined them yet. So right now, let's go back and change this to standards. Just go right back to our batteries, edit, 3 category standards and submit. And now to our standards tab, we'll select the battery, select the test, we'll set standards for height, and pick a random age group. And we'll do the same for female athletes. And I'm going to select apply to all age groups and submit. Now if we go back to our team standards report, by going back into our reports, selecting our 2 assessments, Team Profile, you can see we've got this graph. This graph is an overall view of where users lie in all of the tests, and then it goes by test. So you can see we've only got height here because we didn't define standards for weight or BMI. If we had defined those, we would have a graph for each of them, and then at the top, this graph that encompasses all of them. So you can see here, 25% of our athletes were in the acceptable range, and 75% of our athletes were in the good range. So if you're using standards, this is a great way to really quickly see how the whole team is shaping up. Let's check out the next report. The individual profile is somewhat similar to the team profile, but on an athlete-by-athlete basis. So instead of getting a graph, we just see their actual scores. We see our good, acceptable, and bad ratings here, color-coded, and then we see where our athlete lies. So it's showing us here that our athlete is in the bad range. This is actually because when I typed in the standards, I accidentally put them in backwards. If we just flip those around, it would be showing us that our athlete is in the good range. This report can be exported to a PDF in just the same way the other one was, and if we do that and open up this file, you'll see that it's formatted just like it is on the website. You can also email the individual report to the athletes. You'll see here we can select which athletes we want to send it to. For now I'm just going to select these 4. We can edit the subject line, which by default is just the name of the report, and we can add a personalized message. Now this message is the same for each athlete, but for each athlete it gets sent to, it will fill in, if you leave this portion in, it will fill in this with that athlete's first name, and it will only send them their report. Instead of when you export the PDF getting all of them, they just get one page, their report, and no one else's. Moving on, we've got the progress charts report. This consists of 4 different graphs for analyzing data. Here we see the number of athletes whose score went up, as well as went down, and stayed the same by percentage and by number. If we use this graph, we can see the same information presented slightly differently, and here we've got the average line. We can see that it's a positive average because it's green. If it was negative, it would be red. This graph gives us each athlete's results for both assessments sorted right next to each other. We can see for this athlete their score for both assessments right there. And this gives us a similar view but as a line chart. This one would be a lot more useful if we were using more than 2 assessments. And now we've got the rankings report type. This is another bar graph. It gives you a bar for each athlete, and it's the average between their 2 assessments. So for height, of course, each assessment was the same, but if we switch this to weight, it's their average between the 2, as well as this average line, and this yellow area, which actually gives us the average plus or minus 1 standard deviation. So up here is 1 standard deviation above, and this is 1 standard deviation below for the data. And the last report type we've got is raw data export. If we use this, this actually just gives us all of the data for each test and for each assessment. So you can see here we've got athlete, we've got their date of birth, age, gender, age group, their team, and then the date of the assessment and the tests. So you can see here we've got the first assessment and the second assessment sorted by athlete. So that's our assessments module. I hope this video has answered any questions you might have, and if you do have more questions, comments, or feedback, please direct them to support@athletemonitoring.com, and we will be happy to help.